Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into some pretty significant regulatory shifts that are coming down the track for community pharmacies in England.
That's right. We've got the latest updates here from Community Pharmacy England coming out of those big NHS contractual framework negotiations for 2024-25 and 2025-26.
Yeah, and our mission really is to unpack what these changes actually mean. We'll be looking closely at distance selling pharmacies, DSPs, and also how, any pharmacy can potentially change its opening hours, plus a few other bits and pieces.
Exactly. And these aren't just proposals anymore. These regulations have actually been laid before Parliament. So there are some key dates coming up, June 2025, October 2025, that are really going to shape how pharmacy services look.
Okay, let's jump right in then. So the context here is the Community Pharmacy Contractual Frameworks, the CPCF, and these are amendments to the main rule book, the NHS PLPS Regulations 2013.
hmm Some of this we heard about earlier in the year with the settlement details, maybe around April. But these specific regulations are, well, they're the concrete legal bit underpinning it all, laid more recently.
Right, and it seems like a lot of this is about refining how different pharmacy models, fit into the overall NHS picture.
Precisely. And probably the area getting the most attention, the biggest focus, is these distance selling pharmacies, the DSPs.
Okay, yeah, let's spend some time there. So what are the big shifts for DSPs? You said there were kind of two main things.
That's right. First up, it's about market entry. So, how new DSPs can actually get set up and onto the pharmaceutical list.
Ah, okay. And what's changing there?
Well, the big news is that the specific exemption route they've used historically, that's closing.
The one that let them set up without needing to prove a local need through the P&A, the Pharmaceutical Needs Assessment?
Exactly that one. From June 23rd, 2025, no new applications will be accepted using that specific exemption under the PLPS regulations.
Right. And they're comparing this to how the 100-hour pharmacy exemption was closed off in the past.
Yes, it's a similar kind of move, essentially shutting down a route that bypassed some of the standard market entry controls based on local need.
Got it. So that stops new DSPs using that path from June next year. But what about the ones that are already operating, the existing DSPs?
Good question. They stay. They remain on the pharmaceutical list. This change doesn't kick them off. And they can still, apply to relocate or if ownership changes, that sort of thing.
Okay.
The restriction is purely on new pharmacies trying to get onto the list via that specific exemption route.
Okay, clear. So that's change number one. Market entry closing for new DSPs via the exemption. What's the second big shift? You said that comes later.
Yes, this one kicks in from October 1st, 2025, and this affects how those existing DSPs can actually provide their services, specifically the directed services.
Right. Directed
Yeah.
services. But
Right.
just so we're clear, that's things like the new medicine service, NMS,
Yeah.
maybe the pharmacy first pathways, vaccinations,
Yeah.
the sort of added value clinical services.
Exactly, those types of enhanced services. So from October 1st, the rule change means DSPs will generally not be allowed to provide these directed services in person, face-to-face, at their registered distance selling premises.
Ah, okay. So no walk-in NMS check or vaccination at the DSP's main site.
Generally, no. What they can still do is provide remote consultations from their premises, phone or video, assuming the specific service allows for that.
Hmm.
And they might also be able to provide face-to-face services off-site, so somewhere else entirely, like a patient's home or maybe another approved location. But again, that depends on the service spec and getting approvals like from the ICB where needed.
So the key thing is the premises itself kind of becomes off-limits for face-to-face directed services from October.
That's the crux of it, yes. And it sort of builds on the existing principle that DSPs already have to provide their essential services dispensing advice remotely. This just extends that idea to the directed services delivered from that main site.
Okay, but why? What's the thinking behind stopping them doing, say, an NMS consultation face-to-face on their own premises?
Well, the sources suggest the original idea behind DSPs and the regulations was that they'd be purely remote providers. That's why they got the exemption from the local needs assessments, the P&As.
Right.
But if a DSP starts offering lots of face-to-face clinical services on-site, they start to look and operate much more like a local physical pharmacy, and that potentially undermines the whole P&A system, which is meant to ensure physical pharmacies are located where they're actually needed locally.
Ah, I see. So a DSP offering walk-in services was maybe blurring the lines a bit too much with traditional high street pharmacies, potentially creating local services without having gone through the local needs assessment process.
That seems to be the rationale, yes. The Pharmacy First service launch kind of highlighted this, as DSPs were already limited mostly to remote provision for those pathways. This change makes that principle more consistent across other directed services provided from the DSP site.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this actually play out for specific services then? You mentioned NMS.
Yeah, so for NMS, the guidance suggests a DSP could still do a remote consultation from their premises. And potentially, an off-site face-to-face consultation, like a home visit, might be okay if the service allows it.
But not at the DSP premises itself.
Correct. For Pharmacy First, again, remote is generally okay from the DSP, but you'd have to check the fine print for any specific rules. Things like hypertension case finding. Well, offsite might be possible sometimes with ICB agreement, but definitely not on-site. Many services just won't be doable on-site anymore for DSPs.
Right. The default becomes remote, unless it's off-site and permitted. But hang on, there was an exception, wasn't there? Something about vaccinations.
Yes, absolutely. A really important temporary exception. Until March 31st, 2026, DSPs will still be allowed to give COVID-19 and flu jabs on-site at their premises.
Okay, so a temporary carve-out just for those two. Why the exception?
It seems it was agreed to make sure there's enough vaccination capacity, especially for the winter of 2025-26. And also, to be fair to pharmacies that might have already ordered vaccine stock expecting to deliver it on-site.
Right, practical considerations. So for this coming winter season, 2025-26, DSPs can still do face-to-face COVID and flu jabs at their base, but absolutely no other directed services on-site.
That's the deal, yes. But after March 31st, 2026, that permission for on-site flu jabs at the DSP ends too.
And then what? Off-site only for flu from DSPs, if allowed.
Potentially, yes, if the service specifications permit it, and likely only at specific approved sites, again, to avoid that market entry issue. COVID jabs offsite are expected to continue as they often happen at NHS-approved sites anyway, not necessarily the DSP's own building.
Okay, so this doesn't necessarily eliminate DSPs that might serve a relatively local population, but it really restricts their ability to act like a walk-in clinic for directed services from their registered address. It pushes them back towards the distance model for those services.
That sums it up well. It clarifies the operational boundaries for directed services delivered from the DSP site itself.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Moving away from DSPs specifically to something affecting all pharmacies changing core opening hours. There are updates here too.
Yes. So pharmacy owners still need to apply to their local integrated care board, the ICB, if they want to change their contracted core hours. That's not new. But how they apply has been updated, with a new, distinct route being introduced.
Okay, so tell me about the routes. There's the existing route. What's that for?
The existing route, under paragraph 24 of the regulations, is what you'd use if you want to reduce your total weekly core hours or if you just want to rearrange your existing hours.
And the test for that involves?
It's a two-part test. The ICD has to look at whether the change maintains the current level of service provision in the area, or if not, whether it maintains a sustainable level of adequate provision. It looks at the bigger picture.
So it considers the needs of the whole local area and the hours of other pharmacies nearby, not just the applicant.
Exactly. It's about the overall service landscape locally.
Okay. Now, what about this new application route? How's that different?
This new route, under paragraph 26 2ZB, is only for applications to rearrange the existing number of core hours. Your total weekly hours have to stay exactly the same. You can't use it to reduce hours.
Just shifting them around.
Yeah.
Okay, and the test is different.
Yes, it's a much simpler single test. The ICB just needs to be satisfied that the people who are used to using that specific pharmacy are likely to benefit overall from the change.
Benefit how?
Because overall, they'd be more likely to access the pharmacy services during the proposed new hours compared to the current ones.
So this one focuses right down on the patients who actually use that particular pharmacy, not the whole neighborhood.
Precisely. It's about improving access and convenience for your regular users, assuming your total hours don't change.
That sounds, well, potentially much easier for a pharmacy that just wants to tweak its hours, maybe open earlier and close earlier, if that suits its own patient flow better.
That certainly seems to be the intention, to give pharmacies a bit more flexibility to align hours with their specific patient demand, without needing to satisfy that broader area needs test, as long as total hours are maintained and it demonstrably benefits their users' access.
Okay, so if a pharmacy wants to apply using either route, what do they need to do? What information is needed?
Critically, they must state clearly which route they're applying under. If they don't, the application is invalid from the start.
Right.
And then they have to provide all relevant information the ICB reasonably asks for. This really means building a case with evidence.
Evidence. Okay, what kind of evidence are we talking about? Especially for that new route focused on the pharmacy's own users.
Good question. The sources give examples like data showing demand for your services, prescription numbers, advice requests, maybe even OTC sales broken down by time of day. You need to show how the proposed hours better match when your patients actually need you compared to the current hours.
So data mapping patient activity against opening times.
Exactly. You need to demonstrate that, say, opening earlier captures more of your actual patient demand than staying open later does. It needs to show that overall accessibility for your users improves.
What else might be relevant?
Well, maybe changes in local GP surgery hours, perhaps the opening times of nearby pharmacies, though that's perhaps more critical for the old route. Even things like, data showing the current hours aren't economically viable, alongside evidence that the proposed hours would meet demonstrated patient demand more effectively. The key is the data to back up the claim under the specific test.
It really puts the onus on pharmacies to, well, know their numbers and know their patients' habits if they want to make changes,
Yeah.
especially using that new route.
Absolutely. It's not just about wanting to change hours, it's about proving why based on evidence that fits the specific regulatory test you're using.
Okay, makes sense. Now, aside from the big topics of DSPs and opening hours, you mentioned a couple of other, perhaps smaller regulatory tweaks.
Yes, just a couple other points from the sources. One relates to vaccinations against specifically flu jabs for children.
Ooh, what's changed there?
The regulations have been updated to allow for the central supply of the children's flu vaccine, the nasal spray usually, directly from national NHS stocks to pharmacies.
Ah, so the NHS supplies the vaccine itself, rather than the pharmacy having to buy it in. A bit like how the COVID vaccine works.
Exactly like that. It removes the upfront cost for the pharmacy, which can be a barrier. The idea is to make it easier for pharmacies to participate in future public health vaccination campaigns for kids if needed locally. It simplifies the logistics.
Right. Sounds like a practical enabler for pharmacy's public health role. And the other point.
The other one is a change to the charges regulations, the rules around prescription charges. It's basically an admin fix.
Okay.
It allows for the automatic cancellation and refund of a prescription prepayment certificate, a PPC, if the holder becomes entitled to free prescriptions after buying the PPC, for example, through a maternity or medical exemption.
Oh, I see. So if you bought an annual PPC in January, then got pregnant in June, and got a maternity exemption certificate, the system should now automatically sort out canceling the rest of the PPC and refunding you the difference.
That's the goal, yes, to make it smoother for patients in that situation, removing a bit of admin hassle for them.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible little improvement for patients.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main things we've covered from these new regulations. Big one. The door is closing on new distance selling pharmacies getting set up via that exemption route from June 2025.
Yep.
And then for existing DSPs, from October 2025, a major shift. No more on-site face-to-face directed services at their premises, pushing them to remote or potentially off-site delivery for those, with that temporary window for on-site COVID and flu jabs until March 2026.
Got it. Then for all pharmacies, we've got that updated process for changing core opening hours, particularly the new route just for rearranging existing hours, focused squarely on improving access for that pharmacy's regular users.
And the smaller points, allowing central supply of kids' flu vaccine to pharmacies, and that automatic refund mechanism for PPC holders who become exempt.
So when you boil it all down, what does this package of regulatory changes mean for you, the listener, whether you use a DSP or your local high street pharmacy?
Well, it's really shaping the future landscape, isn't it? It affects where new pharmacies might appear or not appear, in the case of DSPs via that route.
Right.
Changes how and where you might receive certain clinical services, especially from DSPs. Yeah, and it could even influence the opening times of your regular pharmacy, maybe making them slightly better aligned with when you actually need them, thanks to that new rearrangement application route.
It's all part of that ongoing evolution of community pharmacy's role within the wider NHS structure, trying to balance different ways of delivering services.
Absolutely. These changes, hammered out in negotiations and now set in regulation, they really paint a picture of that evolving balance. You've got the push for remote access, the importance of local face-to-face provision, and the regulatory framework trying to manage it all.
It's a complex interplay, how remote services like DSPs coexist and interact with the traditional network, ensuring everything functions effectively for patients. It's a constant balancing act.
Indeed. And maybe a final thought for you to ponder. As pharmacy takes on more clinical roles, how do you see this tension between remote convenience, the need for local presence, and the rules governing it all playing out in the years ahead? It's certainly going to be interesting to watch.